You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting-edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jeanne Amlour, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jeanne Amlour International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact. Hello and welcome again to Business Wealth Impact. Today we have Fredrik Lyhagen, who's a leadership strategist and men's coach. After decades in corporate leadership, he now helps men in midlife reconnect with purpose and emotional depth. Through his company, Through Transformation Within, he creates spaces for honest, heart-to-heart conversations, supporting men to move beyond providing and surviving and step into a more vibrant and authentic life. Hey, great to have you here, Fredrik.
Great to be here. Good to see you again. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, you too. How did I do with the pronunciation?
You're doing pretty well. You're pretty well. But in Sweden, we have a saying that a dear child has many names. So I'm used to variations and I don't really mind.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Fredrik, you've been doing this a while. What do you do and why is it so important for men, not just men in midlife? Because we were chatting about this.
Yeah.
I know you work with men in midlife, but it's actually important for all men to have heart-to-heart conversations. Why is that and what brought you to this?
Let's start with what brought me to this, and then I'll give a bit of backstory to men and their situation. So I have like 20 years in what I call corporate America, large international IT companies. And then 10 years ago, I did a career change to work with leadership development. And in that work, I am very vulnerable. I share my story with the participants, basically open my rib cage and pour from my heart. And very often after, like in the coffee break or the dinner in the evening, men were coming up to me saying, it's so nice to see a strong, powerful man being so vulnerable because it means I'm not alone with my thoughts and it's okay to talk about it. And that's when the seed was sown to, there is something to do for men here. And then I've been thinking about that and seeking out various men's organizations over the years, but nothing never really clicked with me. So I thought, okay, let's start it. I'll do it myself, and I do it the way I would like to see it and the way I have experienced that I can help men. So that's where it comes from. Okay,
that's great. Now, let's dig into what does that mean, heart-to-heart conversations, and how do men start doing that?
Yeah. So heart-to-heart conversations, it's essentially conversations where we dare to show up as our full self. Humans in general, we tend to refer to other people as roles rather than humans. Okay, that's the podcast host, that's the marketing girl, that's the finance guy, that's and then we engage with the role they represent, but rather the full human. That also means that we're limiting ourselves and we don't access the full of ourselves. So heart-to-heart conversations is really about daring to be human and then show up and be witnessed in that conversation.
Okay, so there's a big movement with this vulnerability, Brene Brown.
Yeah, Brene
right?
Brown, yeah.
And that men can cry. Okay, now it seems to me like not just for men, for people, because everybody struggles, but especially men. Okay, that really the first step is to let go of the barrier of this facade of I have to show up a certain way because I'm a man or I'm, and you're right, the titles, I'm a corporate executive, so I have to act a certain way. So basically the answer is to let go of that barrier, like let that drop. Is that kind of it? To let that drop and say, hey, I'm a human being and I'm just going to speak as a human being and stop controlling and editing everything I say? In
its essence, yes, but it's far more complicated than letting it drop, right? Because we are drilled to do. And if we, just to give some context to that, if we paint with a broad brushstroke around the phases of life, around 20 to 30, we go out in life to try to figure out our path. What am I going to do with my life? What am I going to, my education, where I want to live, what kind of partnership do I want, all of that. And then between 30 and 40, we double down and we amass things. We build a family, we get a house, a nice car, we build our career, we're just sort of collecting what I call social attributes. And what I mean by social attributes is material things that prop up the story that we tell about ourselves. So, like a lot of men identify with the title on the business card, with a nice car they have in the driveway and the exotic vacations they take, whatever, right? So we prop up the story about ourselves that we want the world to hear or see. And then typically somewhere around 40, we wake up and say, hang on a second, whose expectations am I trying to live up to? Is it really me who want to do this? Or is it maybe my father's voice in the background or the general societal narrative, right? And then we start to what I call peel the onion. We take off one layer of the onion, one social attribute, and examine it. Do I need this? Is that really me? And then the next onion, until we get to the core of who we are. And that is transition from doing to being, right? And the challenge here is that men are, I think to a larger degree than women, drilled to perform. I don't know if you're familiar with the Jungian James Hollis, but in one of his talks, he says, to all the women here in the audience, if you want to understand what it's like to be a man, imagine taking away all your close friendships where you can share your personal journey. And then you take away your intuition and your sort of internal guidance that you have as a woman. And then you know that you will be assessed based on your performance, based on sort of variables external to you. That's the inner state of an average man, right?
Right. It's hard being a man.
It is hard to be a man. And luckily, I think there's been a shift in society over the last 10 years where it's allowed to say that. There's more and more men's work coming up. And if we look at the data around how men are doing, we are falling behind. Mental health, suicide rates, longevity, in a lot of different metrics.
Well, it's very interesting about the longevity because up till now, all the health studies were about men's bodies till now. It's shocking that all of that health data is based on men. So men have had an advantage with health data. And it was shocking to me. I went to this talk by this famous woman longevity doctor, and she said, till very recently, all of that data was not based on women, only men. So definitely men have had an advantage on certain things like data, like health data, but we're not talking about that. There have been advantages, but it's interesting what you said, because I started thinking, what would that be like? We can't actually say what we really think. So do you think that I know men have their buddies and they do talk about personal stuff. This is interesting. Are you saying most men, even though they have their strong buddies, they actually don't talk about vulnerable stuff even now?
No, I think that's rare. They talk about the latest soccer game, their favorite wine. And if they feel very vulnerable, they can say that they have some challenges at home, but they don't go deep, And I think one experiment is, like a thought experiment is, if you think about your absolutely best friend in life as a woman, that's probably your best friend because you dared to cry on each other's shoulders. You've been totally open. And it's very rare for men to have that type of friendships. It's much more sort of surface level, much more casual. And it's not a relationship where we feel that we can admit, verbalize how we are feeling and the ways we are struggling.
Right. And I think there is a fear of judgment. Well, I should just be a man and suck it up. Is that kind of part of it?
Yeah. Society has told a lot of men that, suck it up, brush it off and move on.
Right. Okay. So what happens when men, well, but I do know that men can communicate with women heart to heart. Is it that they can communicate with women? Because there are a lot of men that do communicate very well in their relationships with their wives, girlfriends, and that does definitely exist.
Absolutely.
So is it that with women they open up more than with other men?
I don't think we can say more or less in this case, but there are certainly areas where men, and we have to generalize to have the conversation, right?
Yes.
Men in general, there are topics that they can't or don't want to speak to their woman about. Because they have to maintain the sense of stability and safety for the woman. And if a man is saying, I'm struggling with, the finances this month, or I feel unsure about this, that can sow seeds in the woman's mind of, I'm not safe. And the deepest desire of the feminine is safety. So a lot of men are very hesitant to share when they're struggling, because then they show that the environment may not be as safe for the woman to relax, or for the feminine to relax.
Okay, so what happens when, let's just cut to this. What happens when men start learning how to have actual heart-to-heart conversations for them?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's a big relief. I'm not alone. We carry a lot of stuff on our own. We don't talk about it. And then we feel miserable. We feel like a failure. We're not man enough. We're not successful enough, And then we sort of undermine our person because we don't live up to our own expectations of a role. And since we can't share it, we think we're alone. So I recently did a retreat a couple of weeks back with a bunch of men in midlife. And just having men verbalizing their emotions, recognizing that other men are sitting in similar situation, was enormously powerful. We had tears after that, because of just the emotional release of, oh, I'm not alone. And we can talk about it. It was beautiful.
Right. Well, I mean, there are certain pockets where men do this, like AA. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's a certain pocket of people that are alcoholics, because they've figured this out for that. But for the average person that doesn't have a drug or an alcohol problem, or is in some sort of rehab, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think the vast majority of men don't have these type of conversations. And then, of course, you have pockets, like you said.
Right.
But we have to, I think my mission is to provide spaces where men can have these heart-to-heart conversations. Because when men do have this, they become stronger as men. They mature in that process. And with a mature masculinity, society gets better, because it has a positive impact on relationships, positive impact on families, positive impact on leadership style, and it has like rings on the water.
Absolutely. And it's like anything, like when women succeed, men succeed. We're all connected, and it goes both ways.
Yeah,
it goes both ways, that when men feel good about themselves, not feeling good about themselves when they're doing the wrong thing, because there's a lot of men that want to feel good no matter what they're doing, right? That's not the answer either.
That's immature masculinity.
Right, exactly. Everybody, we're all in this together. It's sort of like going back to health. When men learn more about women's health, the whole world is transformed, but somehow they've kept men out of certain conversations. I'm not for that. Like, I'm in certain groups and they have these women's stuff. And I said, well, why can't the men join? They're going to learn, and we're all connected. But there is that weird thing, that we're going to segregate, and everybody should just be sharing information. I think that's how I feel.
Yeah, I agree with you. We have to be in it together, and I think what's quite ironic is that the whole inclusivity movement have been quite exclusive of men.
I agree.
Yeah,
completely.
And I think the only way we can heal as a society is if we leverage the unique strengths of the masculine, the unique strengths of the feminine, and then together we multiply, amplify.
Absolutely. And it's hard to voice this, because this is the other thing about women. If you voice something that the general woman, in a group thinks, oh no, that's not progressive enough. But I'm thinking, actually, it's past progressive, because I'm thinking about the next problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They're where they are with the, know what we're doing now. And I'm thinking, wait, but there's other more progressive that men should be included in these conversations, because it helps everybody. Like women's health talks. Men have wives, sisters, mothers, cousins, aunts. They should know. But I said, why aren't the men? And some of the other women did not like that. And I thought, but that's more progressive, because you're right. It created this exclusion because we're doing extra stuff for women. And I'm like, we don't need extra stuff. We need to actually be equal. We need to be, everybody is welcome, because I agree with you. And not many people bring that up, because it's not very PC. Let's be honest. Okay.
No, it's a sensitive topic to bring up. And I get flack for it sometimes.
No, but it's not, it's true though. It's true. Yeah, why do we have to? And also, some of this on the other side, we're trying so hard to empower women. We can't empower anybody. Women have to empower themselves with the aid of people. But as soon as you say, I empower women, you just disempowered them, because it's coming from you. Like, you didn't say, I empower men. You never said that. Oh. You said, I help men, create these blah, 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 which will then they themselves will practice it and empower themselves. That's also something people do not address, and it drives me crazy. You're not going to
exactly
right? Okay.
Like I said in the beginning, my passion is to create spaces for men to have heart-to-heart conversations. Yes. They have to do the work in the companionship of other men, and magic happens in those conversations.
Right. Now, how can a guy that's listening right now say, well, that sounds like pretty good stuff to me, and I want to start being more aware, and I want to start doing this in my everyday life, because they don't have to go to a retreat to do this. And otherwise we would just have to wait to be at a retreat to practice this. Right. So let's just talk about, how can somebody listening who's a man, and women could do it too, but we're talking about men here. What can they do? Like right now, just the first step. What's that first step?
Yeah, I think the first step is self-awareness, meaning being curious about who you are. And, I consider myself Buddhist, and in Buddhism, there's a saying, don't believe everything you think. Right? We are in modern society, all of us, but I think men in particular, tend to be heads on sticks. We are guided by our heads, we are measured on what our heads produce, and we miss out on all the information the rest of the body is sending us. So, being curious about, why do I think the way I think? Why do I react the way I react? As an example, let's say that you say something to me that I feel triggered by, and I sense that emotions of anger, frustration is bubbling up. And then take that feeling of anger and do what's called the subject to object move. Lift it out and poke it. Say, hey, interesting that I feel anger bubbling up when you say what you say. What story inside of me is that triggering? Because the fact that I get triggered means I have something unresolved around what you said. And then start to be curious about, where's this coming from? And if we want to talk psychology, this is basically what Jung is talking about in his shadow work. What are those repressed, suppressed parts of myself that I don't quite have access to? That is dictating how I show up. And I think, since your audience is primarily in business, leaders, corporate entrepreneurs, this has huge implications for leadership as well. If you look at the meta studies on great leadership, what separates great leaders from good leaders, the common denominator between most studies is self-awareness.
Absolutely. It helps everybody to be self-aware. But some people don't know they're not self-aware. And if they were self-aware, they would know that. It's like this loop, right? There's the point where people, if they're not self-aware, they're not self-aware, they're not self-aware. So there's got to be a point where they take the blinkers off. It's like, wow, okay, I wasn't self-aware, but I'm starting to get there now, right?
There's this saying that the surest sign of somebody not being enlightened is that they say they're enlightened. And it's the same with self-awareness. Well, I am very self-aware. Okay, that's a red flag.
Right, because how self-aware are you? And it's not like it's one and done.
Exactly. Done. It's a lifelong journey.
Okay, so let's say the person is listening and starts to, and by the way, triggering. I hear all the time, oh, that person triggered me. It's such a bad thing. Now, here's another very controversial point of view. Okay. I believe being triggered is good because it creates growth.
Exactly. If you're curious enough to turn it inwards. Because the easy thing is to blame the other person. Well, that's a stupid person or ignorant person or whatever it is. And then you shut the door towards self-discovery.
Right.
And that's why I come back to the curiosity. Oh, interesting that I get triggered. What's going on inside of me?
But we are in a society where we cannot trigger people because they are so delicate that we cannot trigger, do not trigger. So we're all walking around like in glass bubbles. Don't trigger me. And time and again, I'm a coach. Coaching people triggers them and they develop from that. But I have had a client say, well, that triggered me. And I'm thinking, good, let's do something about it. What did you learn from that then?
Fantastic.
Right. Fantastic. Because I'm not saying anything that's triggering you. We got a problem on our hands because that means you just know everything. We don't know everything. Okay. So let's talk about conversations. What is one legitimate step that men can take to open up a conversation to being a heart-based conversation?
I would say we need to start with listening. How do we listen? And I can't remember who it is now, but there's this sort of 3-step model, and I've added a 4th step to it. But most of us Well, very often we listen to win, right? So while you're talking, I'm formulating an argument in my head so I can win the conversation. One level up from that is listening to fix. So while you're talking, I'm going through my library of solutions in my head so I can resolve the problem and move on. And then the third level is listening to learn, which requires a lot more attention, listening to both what you say and what you don't say, and what is the message in what you're saying that I can learn from. And then I've added the fourth step, which is listen to love. Holding you in compassion, fully being connected with you, and seeing what's going on for you holistically.
So that's actually really good. That's very actionable. So as a man, or even as a woman, but let's say we're talking about men again, they could say, hey, I'm going to experiment with this. I'm going to listen to my guy friend, and I'm not going to fix him. I'm not going to judge him. I'm not going to win. I am just going to listen and see how I can be loving in this conversation. What shape does that take? Is it just listening? Is it not fixing? Is it asking questions where he might open up more? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm being curious. So what could be behind that, I might ask? Or what assumptions did you make that led you to that action? Or how did you feel when the person responded like that? Questions to help them to discover, how do I make sense of things? Because that is opening up doors to deeper self-discovery as well.
And actually, a man saying to another man, how did that feel when that person said that? I would imagine they would be quite taken aback at that question, right? But it would make them have to respond, and that would automatically open up a different kind of conversation.
Absolutely. And also, with some of the men I coach, because I also do executive coaching, right, with leaders. And sometimes we actually have to first start with practicing labeling emotions. So, they say that, I don't know if I can use rude language in this podcast. They say that men have three feelings: angry, happy, horny. Right? So a lot of men are struggling to put words to how do they feel, and they don't have the nuances and the vocabulary to distinguish the nuances of feelings. So quite often we need to start by, practicing the words around emotions, right?
So do you actually, that's interesting. Do you actually feel that men, is that true? Do you really feel that men have a very small lexicon of emotions and it's like more or less three? I mean, they're exaggerating with that. No, we are exaggerating. But
I'm exaggerating, but it's a lot more limiting than I would say the average woman. Absolutely.
Okay, that's true insight for women, actually. That we have that we are painters and we have this whole palette of colors. But the men just get black, white, red, and green.
And also, I mean, if we can introduce feminine and masculine energy that are distinctly different. All of us have both of it. There's no good and no bad, and we have to find our own unique balance and mature both energies. But the feminine is very much in the moment. It's emotional, it's going with the flow, it's creative, it can also be chaotic, which means that naturally a language evolves in describing the now. Whereas the masculine is forward-oriented, directive, clarity, leadership. So it's all about closure. Let's close now and move on to the next moment.
Future.
Yeah, future.
That is so interesting. I've never thought of it that way, that we are more in the now.
Yeah.
And it is chaotic, I guess. Yeah. Are women more chaotic than men, do you think?
Well, I think we have to be very careful with the language here.
Right.
Because feminine energy does not equal female. Masculine energy doesn't equal male.
Right, yeah.
We all have our unique mix. And some men have more feminine than masculine. Some women have more masculine than feminine. So we have to be careful with the language here.
Absolutely. No, I was just thinking that when you were saying that, I thought, because we are a mix. So an individual has both, and we have to figure out what our blend is.
Yeah, exactly. And what is your sort of dominant energy? Then you have the journey of maturing these energies. Because, an immature masculine is cold, controlling, domineering. An immature feminine is chaotic, cannot regulate emotions, etc. Right? So it's about maturing these energies to the mature feminine, mature masculine, and then integrating. So we can dance between the two energies depending on the context we're in.
Right.
And that's the journey I hope to facilitate for men.
That was very well explained. I like the way you explained it. I think that was one of the best explanations of feminine and masculine energy within each individual.
Yeah.
And the dance. I like that.
The dance. Yeah.
Right. Well, Fredrik, this has been very interesting. I would love to hear, what is your one, I mean, there's a lot, but what's the one philosophy or mindset that you would like to share with our listeners?
I would say, considering that we are talking about the business environment, I would say that the most overlooked aspect of business today is the fact that we're all humans. And if we can remember that behind all these titles, there's a human with hopes, fears, dreams, then I think the conversation can change. And that's going to have a positive impact on relationships in the small and society as a whole.
Right. Well, that's fantastic, because with the era of AI, really being humans going to be at more of a premium moving forward, I believe. Right.
Yeah, I think AI is good for our profession, as coaches, because we're going to realize that this is snippified, thinking for us doesn't give that soul connection. So I think with the advance of AI, we need to also double down on the soul-to-soul connection, heart-to-heart conversations. Otherwise, we just become empty zombies.
Exactly. That's a worry. Well, Fredrik, thank you again for turning up. I hope that everybody found this as interesting as I did. And if you liked this, please write a review or share it or subscribe, and we will see you on the next amazing adventure. You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting-edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jeanne Amlour, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jeanne Amlour International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact.